In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why the Pels loss to the Raptors is great, but also really concerning. Let's make sense of what happened. It's a Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday, day after the Pelicans lose to the Toronto Raptors, 113-104. No, that final score is not as close as what it says there. This is a bad loss for New Orleans, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, depending on how you want to look at it. We'll look at both of those, but it also did tell us something also about Zion Williamson that we'll get into a little bit later. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget about the free daily newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. So I'm going to pose a question here. Are you happy or upset after this Pelicans loss to the Toronto Raptors? Because honestly, you could go either way on this. If you love the tank and you're looking for Cooper Flagg, some of those other top guys at the top of the draft that we're going to start looking at real soon. We're about to become a college basketball show here. You're thrilled about this. Toronto's a team you're competing with for one of those bottom four spots, and that's where you definitely want to end up in. So was Charlotte. So losing both those games, great. Those count like double, in my opinion, if you're rooting for the tank. So in one sense, this is a wonderful loss. Couldn't get much better than this. Zion stat padded, that's cool. And you lost. That's great. But if you want them to be competitive, if you want them to win games, or you want them to be like just better next season, this is the type of loss that's really concerning. And so while it helps the tank, yay, cheers. I need to get like a tank noise drop, like a rumble or something like that to put into the show here, which I can do. Then this is great. If you're like, I want them to be good next year, and just adding Cooper Flagg to the slop you had on the court tonight isn't going to do just that, then this is a concerning loss. Right now you're not seeing any growth from this team, and there's still injuries. There's no Brandon Ingram and all of that, but look, you started DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, Yves Missi. That's a lineup we've wanted to see. That's a lineup that could conceivably be your starting lineup next season, potentially. That lineup needs to play well. That lineup did not play well in this game. The team didn't play well in this game. Earlier on in the season, I talked about moral victories here, and a lot of y'all got sick of that, and I get it. Moral victories are like where we're close. When we put things together and get healthy, we'll get over the hump. Team's relatively healthy right now, and you just had back-to-back, basically double-digit losses. This was 9 points, but it was 16 at halftime, double-digit losses to a 12 and a 13 win team. That's unacceptable. Look, it's one thing to lose in close fashion, but to get blown out, and it meant those moral victories early in the season don't matter anymore. You have to build on the things that you saw in those games, and the Pelicans just straight up have not done that this season. There's been almost no growth from this team as a team. There's been growth from individual players, but as a team, they have not grown. And this loss feels like a replay of so many we've seen before. Turnovers, especially early on, were a problem. They had 8 turnovers in the first half. Bad shot selection because the offense just got stagnant and did nothing. The Pelicans took the majority of their shots in this game from mid-range. We know they're not particularly good at that, and it showed here. They were 15 for 35 from all mid-range and only drew 2 shooting fouls. That's not going to be a great thing. Of their shots in this game, where did the numbers just go? The frequency, 37% came from mid-range jumpers, 33% at the rim, 29% from 3. By comparison, Toronto took 42% of their shots at the rim, 27% from 3, from mid-range, and 31 from 3. That's not how you're going to win NBA games anymore with the shot selection and shot profile that New Orleans had. And when the ball stops moving, and it did, and you go away from Zion Williamson, more on that in the next segment, this is what's going to happen, and you're forced to take bad mid-range jumpers, and that leaves you with an offensive rating of 101, which is terrible. The team already has a bad offense, and their offensive rating on average is a 109, more than 8 points less in this. That's not going to work. Just bad isolation basketball where nothing moves. The ball doesn't move. Everyone's just standing around, and you can see it on so many possessions. We're well over halfway through the season at this point. Why is this still a thing? Losing the points in the paint battle. They did that in this one, losing that. When you had Zion Williamson playing well, they lost points in the paint 64-58. At least it was kind of close, but at the same point, you should be winning that. That goes with when they stopped feeding Zion. You also had missed free throws. They had 5 straight missed free throws that could have kept this game close. On a night where you weren't shooting well, New Orleans wasn't. They also didn't take threes in this game like they needed to. Just 28 in this one. Yeah, you're going to lose. And that starts to speak to a process problem. You know, if they lost in a different way, something we hadn't seen before, that'd be one thing. But when it's just the same old song and dance all over again, that doesn't. Look, Willie Green got thrown out of this game. A lot of people wanted to see that kind of be fiery. After Willie Green was ejected, they still lost. They were outscored 23-24, so it was 1 point. They didn't gain any ground there. This is the type of loss that you're like, wait, are the issues here deeper, or is it just injuries? And when they're evaluating the end of the season, they're going to need to look at this loss, the loss to the Charlotte Hornets too, where Zion played in both those games. And you're going to have to be like, what the heck? Right? That should already be both these losses, as much as maybe we want them for the tank, if you're in favor of that, need to be eye-opening. These are the type of losses that ownership needs to look at and be like, no, like that's not okay. Because these type of losses, again, we want losses, but we'd like them to be close and for you to be competitive in this one. And the Pelicans weren't. They were not competitive. The final score does not really show how close, it was in this game. New Orleans finished with just 40 points at halftime. They scored 35 in the fourth quarter. They won that quarter 35-18, a 17-point swing. They actually took the lead and then got outscored in the fourth quarter 39-29. That's disgusting. Bad defense as it's been all year long. Losing the rebounding battle. 23 second chance points for the Toronto Raptors here. You're not going to win games. And everything I've said before, I've said multiple times this season. Show growth or make the changes you need to make. And right now the team is doing neither. And that's what's unbelievably disappointing. There's only so much you can do in the middle of the season, but there are things you can do. So let's get into, in the next segment, Zion Williamson. He looked really good in this game, and I think that proved a point about something. Let's get into that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game between the Chiefs and the Eagles in New Orleans, and there's endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or my favorite, even betting on the coin toss, tails never fails, y'all. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. Saints aren't in. I don't really care about either of these two teams, but I want to watch and I want to make it interesting and I want to have something to root for. So with live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. And the live betting feature is going to let you stay involved no matter what happens. And the app is super easy to navigate. It's what I love about the FanDuel app here. And knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Look, if you'd taken Toronto -1.5 in this one, you'd have those $200 in bonus bets to bet on whatever you want in Super Bowl 59. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And join us on subscribe to the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. And start your day with the all-new free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. So let's keep talking about the Pelicans losing to the Toronto Raptors 113-104. Zion Williamson had a good game, like borderline dominant game that's going to fly under the radar because of how bad this loss was. And the fact that there was just some stuff kind of weird about it for New Orleans too. Zion in this one, I don't know why it just jumped to the fourth quarter here, finished with 31 points on 13 of 18 shooting. That's 72.2%. 5 of 8 from free throw, which isn't good. 7 rebounds, all of them defensive too, which I think is important. 2 assists and 3 blocks. He was good in this game. He's been good. You see how dominant he is. And since coming back from the hamstring injury in the games that he does play, he's looked very good overall. And again, shows that you probably need to at least build around him for another year. I think a lot of the other rest of the roster needs to be different. But I think Zion, if you want to be competitive next year, that's going to be your best ticket for it. He needs to be the focal point. Right? Like, we shouldn't need to say this at this point, but it feels like it needs to be said. He needs to be the focal point here. And at times it feels like he's not. There were multiple possessions, particularly in the second half, where he just doesn't touch the ball. The ball just doesn't really move at all, but they don't get it to Zion Williamson. They almost at times don't look for Zion Williamson. And when a guy goes 13 of 18, that's incredible. Those are really good numbers. He had Grady Dick and other people in foul trouble early in the first half. That's a great position to be in. Grady Dick had 4 fouls. Jakob Poeltl had 3. We'll get more into Jakob Poeltl in the next segment here. You had Orlando Robinson, who's guarding Zion a bunch, with 4 fouls in the first half. You had 2 guys that could have fouled out easily in the first half of this game. And in the second half, you just didn't go at them in a way that you did in the first. And I do not understand that whatsoever. 14 fouls for Toronto in the first half, just 10 in the second half. Keep feeding Zion and doing what was working, and the team did not do that. He was 6 of 9 in the second half. He had 9 field goals in the first half too. Why not feed him more when a guy goes 7 of 9? In the second half, should CJ McCollum be taking more shots than Zion? Should DeJounte Murray take more shots than Zion Williamson? The answer to that is no. Look, Murray scored 12 points on 12 shot attempts. That's not good. CJ, 15 points on 14 shot attempts. Not good. Zion had 14 points on 9 shot attempts. Look, CJ and DeJounte have the ball in their hands. They bring the ball up the court. So when the offense doesn't, nothing happens. And look, Zion's guilty of that too. If he's not going to move and try and get open or whatever, they're not going to pass the ball because they already have it in their hands, so they'll just rip the shot. And that's what you saw in this game. And that's where it goes stagnant. It evolves into isolation basketball, and then they shoot poorly because you're giving the defense what the defense wants. You know, at a certain point, the coach needs to do something about this. Now, can you bench Murray? Can you bench CJ? I don't really know at this point. But you got to do something to just change the way the thing was going. Now, they did a good job coming out in the third quarter. Really were aggressive, looked pretty good. And then that just all went away in the fourth, just completely went away for New Orleans in this one. You saw some good defense on guys like RJ Barrett and others, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the next segment here. But overall, like, you just kind of abandoned what was working, and that's where you're going to lose games. Just that simple. They need to this is where building an identity is really important. Figure out what works, what's good, and make that the thing that you do. But right now, this team doesn't have that identity to fall back on when there's some adversity. You go down 16, cool. We know what we do well, so we're going to go out and do it. Again, what's the offensive identity and things like that? And I think the idea of an offensive identity and all of that is a little bit overrated at times. Sometimes you just go and win and you do what it takes. But I do think having some sort of baseline thing, which they do, it's just not working and probably needs to be adjusted. That's where, again, losing's good. Tanking. Let's get Cooper Flagg. Let's get some of those other guys that are up there. I'm a big Ace Bailey guy too, and some of the others. But you need to, Dylan Harper's great too. There's a couple guys that I actually really like in this draft, including some that if the Pelicans do fall, we are going to look at, and I'm going to be very happy with that. I really like Derek Queen out of Maryland from watching him a little bit recently. So besides the point, we're not in draft coverage just yet. In like 2 weeks, we will be. So you need to get back to feeding Zion. He's Zion Williamson. When you have possessions where he doesn't touch the ball, find the player. I don't know what you need to do. Do something, because just no. I always joke here, and I'll get real with y'all here for a second, right? Like, I don't know more than Willie Green does. None of us do. None of us do. Unless you played in the NBA or you were coaching in the NBA, you don't know more than the current NBA head coach. He might not be great at his job, but you don't know more than him. And so I always find it kind of funny when it's like, yeah, people come up, Jay, you should coach them. No, I shouldn't. They do worse than they do with Willie Green or whoever the coach would be. I should not be doing that. And then you have games like this where you're like, wait a second. Am I smarter than some of the people working with the Pelicans? I'm not. I'm not smarter than David Griffin. None of us are. I mean that. Even if his decisions didn't work out or whatever, none of us are smarter than them, because this is literally what they do for a living. They get paid a lot of money to do it, and you don't get there by a fluke. They know more. And then you see something so freaking obvious of, could we get Zion the ball? Could we get Zion Williamson the ball when they had no answer for him whatsoever? Jakob Poeltl down low trying to protect the rim. Didn't work. Put a wing on him and Grady Dick to see if some mobility can keep up with him. No, doesn't matter. None of that worked. Get him a full head of steam, and that guy was just at the rim. He was also getting fouled too, even at times when he wasn't, but he was. More than he often does. Feed him, and they just go completely away from it. Next year, when Zion's on the team, and he's going to be, it feels like, this needs to be one of the biggest priorities of the team of, we are going to feed Zion all game, every game. Now, he's got to be in shape to do it, but he looks in shape right now. So that needs to be a thing. It's not a thing right now, and that is really confusing and concerning when it comes to trying to figure out what's going on here. Why aren't they? That's the bigger question, right? Like, why aren't they? We'll try and answer that question a little bit later in the year here, but they got to figure this out. Have to figure this out in some capacity. Lose games while figuring it out, but you need to be able to get this right going into next season. By the way, that starting lineup of Murray, CJ, Trey, Zion, Missi in limited possessions this season. I'm not sure if this is counting tonight's game or not. It usually updates pretty quickly. Plus 12.4. The offensive rating is really good, 133.3. That's phenomenal. The defensive rating is not good, 120.9, so 121. Still winning those possessions and everything, but defensively that is a little bit concerning here, though they do force a lot of turnovers. They just cannot grab defensive boards enough in that lineup, which is concerning because you have Yves Missi in there. I want to talk about him and his struggles in this game and kind of where he's at, along with Trey Murphy's defense. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. For your second listen, Saints in Philly to interview Kellen Moore as their next head coach. Sounds like he's going to get the job, but there is a plan for Mike McCarthy. Ross Jackson is making sense of everything black and gold over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I also think there's going to be a lot of Senior Bowl coverage there as well. So let's wrap up talking about a few more things with this game, the 113-104 loss to the Toronto Raptors. We touched on this in yesterday's show, but Yves Missi is really, really struggling right now. And this was a game that you look at and you're like, no, that's not good. Like he should be playing a little bit better. Now, he's a rookie. We don't get upset about a rookie, particularly a center, really struggling. I want to be very clear on that that's not something that should concern us tremendously here. But not playing well definitely isn't it either, and that's a little bit what you're seeing. So it's natural to struggle, but they need to kind of figure out what to do with him is what I'm trying to say. He didn't take a shot in this game, nor probably should he have. As a starter in 22 minutes, he was a minus 13. That's not a really good number either. Against Jakob Poeltl, he struggled. Poeltl was really good in this game for Toronto. He finished with 21 points on 10 of 15 shooting. There's just, when he got to the rim, when he got inside, he could kind of do what he wanted. He was a plus 20 for the Toronto Raptors. That was the team lead. You had someone like Chris Boucher off the bench. He was 4 of 9 from 3. He was a plus 18, tied for second most for the Toronto Raptors. Both those guys were being heavily defended by Missi when he was on the court. Missi really struggled to defend Boucher in space out there on the perimeter, not really knowing to contest him, looking a little bit lost, leaving Boucher open. 4 of 9 from 3 is really going to burn you right there. And then just couldn't handle the size and physicality of Jakob Poeltl down low. So if you can't defend on the inside and you're struggling on the perimeter, it's not great. I mentioned this. You've seen Missi really hit that rookie wall and probably negatively impact this team or impact them in a negative way. And now that that's happening, I think this is something that will cause the Pelicans to still evaluate the center market in the offseason. Can you go get a Miles Turner? Can you go get somebody else to try and upgrade this roster? I think they would still do that even though you have Yves Missi here. And I think that's really worth keeping in mind. And this game kind of shows you why. You look at this one and you're like, oh yeah, he's further along than we thought, but he's still pretty far away from being like the guy where you're like, you cannot under any circumstances take him out of the starting lineup. I think he'll still be the starter going forward. He should still be the starter going forward unless they want to play a small ball lineup and go with Zion at the 5. But if they don't, you still need to have him out there on the court, and he's going to kind of be the best guy for you in those sorts of minutes here. The Zion at the 5 lineup, there's really only been one of them this year, and it's not good. It's really not good, and that's DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Javonte Green, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, 14 possessions, minus 20.5 net rating. It's bad. So you figure that he will probably still be the starter going forward in Missi, but you're really, really seeing him struggle right now. This is really going to kind of be one of the biggest tests for him. One of the things that we've seen from him all year long is that he absorbs information really quickly and can kind of process that and then go put it into action out there on the court. But he is struggling here when it comes to that. We'll see how he does with coaching and all that to help bring him along, because if he makes some strides pretty quickly, that's then like a super encouraging sign. But he's a rookie. He's going to struggle. Not concerned about him in the long term, but I do think, when you see these struggles, it won't preclude the Pelicans from trying to upgrade that center position potentially, and maybe making that, I think that could be a priority too. Like, not like, oh, we'll do that if we get nothing else. It's like, no, this is something we need to do. Also in this game, you saw Trey Murphy have a very good defensive game. I thought he was matched up with RJ Barrett a lot in this game, and Barrett really struggled. 1 of 4 from 3, 8 of 18 from the field for just 17 points. You saw Trey Murphy, it was something that Antonio Daniels loves to say on the broadcast, right? KYP, know your personnel. And that's what Trey Murphy did. It looked like he was ready for this game, at least on the defensive side of the ball. Who won this game for Toronto was Jakob Poeltl, going 21 points on 15 shot attempts. Davion Mitchell was some of the work that he was doing on offense to facilitate all of them. You had Chris Boucher off the bench really give them 14 solid points, including really good 3-point shooting. It wasn't RJ Barrett. It wasn't Scotty Barnes who won the game for New Orleans. Those guys were very inefficient on the night. That's minorly encouraging that you shut down like the better players on the team. Scotty Barnes was 6 of 21. That's under 30% for 21 points. He was even a negative when he was out there. you saw a lot of really smart stuff from Trey Murphy in those matchups, forcing RJ Barrett to his right hand. He's a lefty, so he wants to go left, but not letting him get there. Looking at Trey navigating some screens and being like, here's where I need to position my body, how I need to have my hips oriented to prevent and cut off those type of drives and moves and force a guy like RJ Barrett into an uncomfortable position. So you saw him do that. One of the things we wanted to see from him is a commitment on the defensive side of the ball. And you saw more of that from him in this game. And you've seen that increase and increase and increase. And I thought that was a really good game and a really good performance from him overall. And those are the type of steps you want to see. We know what it is on offense. He's a special player when it comes to that. No one can make a shot in this game, though. He needs to grow in other areas, too. He definitely has been. And to do this all at once, as I said, it's one thing to add more on offense and to use your energy on that side of the ball, but then to also have a game where you're like, let me show you what I can do on that side of the ball and put it all together. That's a real bigger leap than you may realize for Trey Murphy III this season. It's overall very, very impressive, and I think his contract in a couple of years is going to look like a steal and one of the better values in the league, him and Herb Jones as well. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Are you happy about the loss? Are you frustrated about the loss? Little column A, little column B. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Trade talk tomorrow. There's someone generating a lot of interest, and it might not be who you think. We're going to talk about that in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. See y'all next time.